Well, then what we do is we add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, and the result of that, you get a number. And then you get into that, and it's going to give you insight in terms of the number 7. Or we could do 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7, and it's going to give you a whole other perspective on an aspect of 7. And when we start going into this, and this is stuff we're going to do in the astrology class, guys, but it's also the magic squares. And there's a magic square for every one of the numbers that relates to one of the planets. And it basically relates to every one of these columns and rows adds up to the same number, which ends up being the number of the planet. And then you take it apart, and it goes into all these different levels of mysteries about the actual planet. And then you can take all of that geometrically too, because any number you can actually make a geometric form. And that is, I mean, it's just a simple thing, but that is the basis of creation. When we start talking about this, these are the formulas of how spirit takes form. Is through number. And and there's a divine intent. I'm not saying there isn't a picture too. And that's one of the things also that I want to mention, is that when we talk about crop circles and even number and geometry, we're talking about symbols. Symbols are a different language. It's something that we've tended to forget about. It seems to come up with, it started to coming back a little bit with Freud and Jung and psychology and some things like that. But we're going to find that the actual language of the soul, this deeper aspect of our being, not the intellect, the language of the soul is pictures or symbols. And I think you've all probably heard the quote, and it's an incorrect quote, I'll correct it, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's actually a picture is worth 10,000 words. And that's a Chinese, that's a famous Chinese aphorism. Have you ever tried to describe a picture in words? You should try it sometime. It's a whole different thing. But if you have the picture, it has, so working with symbols has no limits and boundaries. I have worked with symbols most of my life, and I will tell you that there is no limit, there is no boundary to the level of depth of understanding or breadth of understanding when you have a symbol. One of the things when I was over in Europe, and it's each time, but it's just an example, I used to take people to sacred sites, of which there's a lot of them these days, that they built cathedrals on. Well, you get into Gothic cathedrals, it's a whole other trip, because they're all sacred geometry too. And you have to also remember, so it's very interesting when you go into these cathedrals, and most of them were built in 1000, 1100, 1200 AD. In a way that really... And you're going to see that sculpting inside and outside the cathedral, it's all pictures of the stories from the Old and New Testament. And the stained glass windows are all pictures of the stories that have to do with the key parts of that which is the Christian mystery or whatever that's being portrayed. These people couldn't read. They didn't even have printing. They didn't have Bibles. Gutenberg and the printing press was about 300 or 400 more years in the future. And the only way they could learn was through pictures. And we're going to find that that's the basis of all learning. And so when we go back to numbers and we go back to geometry and these kind of things, we're going to find that is important. When we go back even to early writing, it was hieroglyphic. Look at the Chinese ideograms. They become stylized at this point, but they actually were representations of the actual things, the pictures, of what they were trying to communicate. The same is true in terms of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. So when we go to this deeper level of consciousness, and that which is the language of the soul, and that which is communicating at this deeper level, we're going to find that this whole thing of symbolism is very, very profound. And the more that you work with symbols, the more you literally awaken your soul. And that knowledge is structured in consciousness thing that I was talking about. Because that enlivens what is already in them. And you're amazed at how much you know. Because as you start to awaken these things, it all comes up as a remembering. And it's obvious. And if you really do it consistently, you'll be actually very amazed at how quickly your consciousness grows, how quickly your awareness grows, how quickly your wisdom and understanding goes. And part of it was when going to England and going to these places, this is all symbolic. They didn't write things out in language or in letters. These were in symbolic forms. Some of the things we went to Newgrange in Ireland. I don't know how many of you have been to, has anyone been to Newgrange? How recently? I mean, in the last 10 years, 15 years? Okay. Pretty amazing place, huh?
What is the basis
Yeah.
of all of the argument and challenge?
Yeah, north of Dublin. Yeah, and with Noth and Doth. I don't know if you went to Noth and Doth. They're also there too. Okay, and they're all actually part of a connected complex. But if we took Newgrange, this is a mind-boggling place. And this is 3,500, 4,000 BC. And part of the thing that's interesting is that they all used Pythagorean math and geometry. One of the things you want to understand is this was a universal language. And so we talk about it as Pythagorean, but this was like 3,000 years before Pythagoras. They're utilizing and expressing the same principles he's talking about in Great Britain, in Stonehenge and Avebury and Newgrange and all these things. It's all Pythagorean. Yet Pythagoras wasn't born for another 3,000 years. What is this? It's a universal wisdom. It's a cosmic wisdom. It's the divine intelligence. It's this cosmic language. It's universal. And the ancients were very much in touch with it and very much utilizing it, and it was the basis and foundation of their civilizations. And it's one of the reasons that their civilizations lasted as long as they did, because they based their civilizations in cosmic law. Things that are based in cosmic law last, because they're based in cosmic law, which are eternal principles. What's our problem? These are civilizations that last 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. We're lucky if we get them around for 200. What is the whole thing here? I'll throw this out. It's a little zinger. What's the whole thing about the metric system? And inches and yards and feet. Do any of you have any sense of feeling about this? Because we were going to find, so does anyone know and understand where the metric system came from? That has really swept Europe, swept most of the world, but not the United States. They keep trying. They keep trying. For some reason it doesn't stick in this country. It doesn't stick. We're going to find that the ancient measurement system was all based on the proportions of the body that are all natural and based in cosmic law. A foot, yard, inches, all of these things we're going to find. A mile. These are all based on cosmic proportions that are based on the earth and the distance to the moon and the sun and all of these various things and the actual proportions of the actual physical body. Because we're going to find the design of the human body is a microcosm of the design of the entire creation. And these are the things of the proportions and the designs and the numbers and all of these and the geometries that are the basis of all of this knowledge and wisdom. So when we start talking about the metric system, it is actually a false measurement system. It was created during Napoleon's time in Egypt when they invaded Egypt and started measuring the pyramids and doing their research in terms of the ancient Egyptian culture. And they decided that the number 10 was a more rational, logical number to base measurement on than 12. It's 12 inches to a foot and all kinds of different things. We've got all these things like inches and feet and yards. And said, no, let's just make it all based on 10. But we're going to find that 10 in the metric system is out of harmony with the entire creation. We're going to find it is not based in cosmic law. It is a rational human creation that somebody thought was pretty cool and made sense. And guess what? When we start measuring things, and these measurements are not in harmony with natural law and the laws of life and the laws of creation, guess what happens? Things fall apart. That's what's happening with this culture right now. And this is just an example. But if we start talking about measurement, it has to do with creating sacred space. There is nothing that isn't sacred. And if you don't approach life from the sacredness of life, then you're going to find that what you get is very transient, and it doesn't last. And it's very mortal. But we're going to find that when we talk about architecture, which gets into Masons and all of this, the Masonic thing and all of this had to do with a body of knowledge. It's the same knowledge we're talking about. It has to do with divine proportion. It has to do with geometry. It has to do with number. It has to do with measuring creation. Their big thing was Solomon's Temple, and it goes into a lot of stories, which we're going to actually find in terms of the spiritual hierarchies, that the Solomon's Temple is considered to be, at the first temple, was considered to be the most perfect creation of proportion there was. And that when there was the loss of that temple, when it was destroyed, we haven't really been able to replicate it. And it relates on other levels in terms of the struggle of humanity to achieve perfection and the like. And one of the things is we're in the physical. And in the physical, geometry is the measuring of Earth. So when we are measuring Earth, we are actually trying to create sacred space. And it was that the priesthood, in these ancient times, was the custodian of this knowledge and wisdom. And it was utilized for building all of the temples, or laying out the cities, or basically even laying out the countries. So if we get into China, for example, we're going to find the term that we would use these days would be feng shui. But it would be that the entire country was laid out based upon the principles of feng shui, which is that here the emperor was going to be in the heavenly city in Beijing, and the dragon lines and all of this, the geomancers went all through the country and organizing and structuring everything, the roads, everything. But they identified, because you can, with consciousness, you can feel and you can map out the energy systems of the earth, which gets into the next part that we're going to get into with the crop circles. But it's basically where they were able to identify what they called the dragon lines, and they were able to enliven them and enhance the power and strength of these dragon lines, and how they all met in the emperor's palace in Beijing. And so all the power was there, and all his power went out through the system, and all of that power came back to him. And there was this flow. And these were civilizations that knew and understood these principles. And these are civilizations that lasted for thousands of years. And there isn't a civilization that didn't have its equivalent of feng shui. Yeah, well.
It's not real product. It's not real wealth. It's not. It's basically a certain
law.
Right.
But they were all conscious of the
right.
Fibonacci
Right. It's the phi. The golden section. Right. No, Fibonacci is the one who. Oh, they knew all this. If we start going and talking. Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's where there's other things. Fibonacci actually identified a very simple way to really plot the progression of phi by the adding of the numbers. But the principles of phi were built into all of these ancient civilizations. And they had to do, well, it's basically the spiral. And it has to do with the ongoing unfoldment. I mean, if you take a sunflower, you're going to see that it's a Fibonacci spiral. If you take a pine cone, it's a Fibonacci spiral. If you take the leaves on the stalk of a plant, it's a Fibonacci spiral. These were universally known. And again, it was us on the level of consciousness identifying these cosmic laws as they manifested through nature. And then it was saying, okay, we want to be in harmony with nature. We want to be part of the cosmic law. We want to fit into the flow of all of this. So we want to base our culture and civilization, what we create and build, based upon these same principles. And that was the basis of all of this ancient culture and civilization. Yeah. What about it?
$65 billion.
Yeah.
Are they scared?
Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of levels to it. I mean, George Washington was a Mason. He was the one who was in charge. He hired the French architect that came over and laid out the whole thing. And it took, it's still ongoing. I mean, the cathedral's part of it. Part of this thing, I mean, it was just finished a few years ago. This stuff started back in the 1700s that Washington started doing this. So we can get in, and he knew. He wanted a city that was just dedicated to be the capital of this country that was based on these laws.
For 2 years.
So there's all kinds of levels to it, but your quick answer is yes.
The bottom line.
So 5-6
28%. There was a
years
law
ago,
back in the 80s
when we
that
were
anything over
not
18%
so
was usury. It was against the law.
egoically
It was criminal.
mind creatures, we were more connected to consciousness, and
28%.
that's
Interest.
why we could
There's-
have these kinds of
Talk about-
Why was it that they had this knowledge and we lost it?
right.
Okay.
So
No,
this is
that's a good question. There's a lot of answers. Quick answers was
17 years
what I'm
ago.
talking about in Great Britain and these kind of things were
Started January
post-Atlantean.
2008.
And when we talk about when Atlantis went down, it was an incredibly high civilization that was based on this stuff. And the first, the staging platform for post-Atlantis was Ireland, Great Britain, and Scotland. Ireland, England, and Scotland. And then it was launched to the continent, which gets into all kinds of things. Second, so they inherited, or they already had this knowledge from a high civilization. That civilization disappeared. And if there weren't people that weren't part of that, that knowledge would die off.
How far are we into this?
So they were able to establish the beginnings of this at a time of very ancient past, because Atlantis went down about 12,000 years ago. But the other part of it is, and this gets in more to the end part of what we're talking about, but we're now just coming out of what is called Kali Yuga, or the Dark Age.
In 1929.
And so for the last 5,000 years, we have been in Dark Age. What does that actually mean? It means that we evolutionarily came to a point in our evolution where the powers that be, the spiritual hierarchies, decided we had to learn to figure it out for ourselves. Up to that point, we were clairvoyant. Up to that point, we consciously worked with the gods. We had spiritual sight. We were working with the gods, and therefore we were very conscious and aware of these cosmic laws and these principles. And we made them the basis and foundation of our cultures and civilization. But as of 5,000 years ago, the veil, we could say, between the spiritual and material worlds, that door was closed. So that we had to start figuring it out for ourselves. That support, that access to knowledge, that guidance, you could think of the gods, if you will, the spiritual hierarchies, as being the parents guiding children. And we had come to a point, it would be like a child, a mother and a child. There comes a point where the mother must cut the apron strings in order for that child to be able to stand on its own, to figure out who it is, and basically what it's capable of doing. And we know the child's going to make mistakes. We know the child's going to screw up. But it's the necessity, it's part of the process that that child has to go through in order to achieve adulthood. Think of Kali Yuga. The beginning of Kali Yuga is when the gods cut the apron strings to humanity, to where we then had to figure it out for ourselves, which means they closed awareness to the spiritual worlds. So now, as of December 21st, 2012, we are now out of Kali Yuga and Sat Yuga, which is a new age of light. And this is totally connected to the crop circles, because they're guiding us. And they are a manifestation of the transition of our moving from an age of darkness into an age of light. And they are reminding us in our souls of what we already know, but really because of the heavy overlay of our scientific, materialistic, intellectual, rational culture and civilization, we've forgotten all this. And we've tried to figure things out, like the metric system. Sounds great. Doesn't work. How many of those things do we have? Our whole world is full of them.
So is it significant that the United States is the one that did not go
Oh,
to
yeah.
the
Yeah, no, we have a role to play that no other country can play. That's a whole nother huge thing. What?
That's good to hear.
Yeah. No, if we lose it, the world loses
in
it.
order to force down interest rates, and they're trying to do
There's a big
that
responsibility
for the real
here
estate
that
market.
we do it
Try to
right.
stop the
We
foreclosure.
do what we're supposed to
Because
do.
we're trying to
The
create
reality
wealth
is, if
under
we don't
the
do it, it
downward
doesn't get done.
spiral of real estate value, because
We
it's
are
eroding
that
everybody's
society,
wealth,
that
and it's
culture,
also
that
creating
consciousness
foreclosures. It's
that is the
creating
basis
real
of all of this
huge
stuff that we're
disaster.
talking about.
And also
And we will get into why all this
And
is
so we're
happening in
trying
England
various
and
ways
not
to
say the
stop
United
this
States.
downward
But that's a
catapult
different,
movement.
but it's
As long as
connected.
the
But
banks
yes,
are
the quick
foreclosing
answer I mean, these are quick answers because the elaborate answers are whole classes unto themselves. But yeah, there's a reason why the metric system doesn't stick in the United States. They keep trying to make it stick and it doesn't stick. Anyway, so we're into this understanding of this ancient wisdom, and this ancient wisdom is a reflection from the gods of that which are the divine cosmic principles, and are the divine ideas and the divine archetypes that form the basis and foundation of all of creation. And here's another picture for you, just to kind of expand it, because it's all about temples. It's about understanding temples. And a temple, what is a temple? A temple is a place of worship, worship of what? Of God. The entire creation is a temple. The entire creation is a temple. God created this in order for him to discover who he is, but we are each part of this being, and for us to discover who we are and what it is, and that this entire creation is it. And all of life is a temple. And the temple, if we're going to worship, it has to be aligned with that which we are wanting to worship. If we get into feng shui, or we get into all this ancient architectural knowledge, we're going to find that depending upon we're going to create a space. I don't care if it's for business or for worshiping God or what it is. You're going to find that there's going to be different dimensions and different designs, different architecture for different purposes, because that quality of energy and consciousness that is wanting to be cultivated in that space, every space that's laid out has a function and has a purpose and has a divine intent and a divine design. Is that what we get in our culture? No, our culture doesn't have a clue. We go back, the last this was written about was a fellow by the name of Vitruvius back in Rome, who laid out these proportions, and some of that came down into the Middle Ages, but most of it has been ignored and lost. But here it gets into understanding that when we start talking about number and geometry, it is the science of spirit taking form, or the basis of manifestation of all of creation, of the expression of the divine into form. And we're going to find that that realm and dimensional reality, and where the divine plan is intending to be perfected, is in this dense physical material reality. You look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, we're going to see that Malkut, the kingdom, is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And it is the 10th Sephiroth, which is this physical dimensional reality. And everything in creation, all the dimensional realities, all the spiritual hierarchies, everything, are all feeding down into this realm in order their whole purpose is to be part of or to facilitate the perfection of the divine plan in the physical. And in that we are the beings of the physical, we are those beings that have been designed by God in order to be the conscious co-creators with God to facilitate the completion of the divine plan. And we are the only beings in the physical. None of the other spiritual hierarchies of beings have ever experienced physicality. They don't even know what it's like. There's all kinds of things related to this, but we are the agency of the divine, if you will, of perfecting the divine plan, and it is to take place in the physical, or heaven on earth, or if we were going to use these classic geometric Pythagorean terms, it's squaring the circle. How many of you have heard of that term, squaring the circle? Think for a moment, just in terms of what I just talked about earlier about number and form, to think what you might think squaring the circle might have to do with.
We have the real potential.
Well, if the square is the manifesting into the physical reality, and then the circle is oneness, it's bringing oneness into the physical reality.
Yeah, or another way of saying the oneness, it's divine, or it's spirit. So it's making spirit in matter, or it's taking the divine plan and manifesting it into physical perfection. This is actually a mathematical, geometric thing that's been known throughout time, the squaring the circle, because it's tricky. And what it is trying to get the same volume contained within a square that the same volume contained within a circle. You've got two completely different geometric forms, and it's very tricky, but it can be done. And in a symbolic way, what humanity is in the process of doing is squaring the circle. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so it goes back to this. So when we start looking at some of these crop circles and things, and you look at squares and circles and things like that, when you start learning the alphabet and the language, and you start putting these things together, we begin to really understand what it is that they're trying to say. But a lot of the crop circle stuff is much more complex. So let me kind of shift a little bit, because there's a lot of information here. And so what I have been talking about here goes directly to what is inherent within the crop circles. These are geometric forms that are based in math, that are basically are laying out the cosmic laws in a cosmic language that is totally universal. And we need to brush up on our skills, which the ancients had with Pythagoras and Plato, etc. They would be able to look at all of these crop circles and understand what was being said, because it is in the language of math and geometry. And what it is bringing us back, what they're wanting to do is bring us back to this universal language. This language, and think of it. I mean, one of the things that when we start, I've lived a lot all over the world, but I don't care what country you're in, or what culture, or what civilization. Different languages, different cultures, you're going to find number and geometry is the same. I don't care if it's a scientist in China, or a scientist in the United States, or a scientist in Russia, or whatever. They're speaking the same language, the same numbers, same geometry, everything else. Even here on Earth, you're going to find in a practical way that this is a universal language. Okay. So here, that's major in terms of understanding this. Now, why? To get to the question of why, as a vast majority of these crop circles in this small area of Wiltshire and Somerset. And to understand this, then, we have to get into a whole nother level of geomancy and understanding the structure of our galaxy, specifically, and the structure of our Earth, and our relationship with the star system. So one of the things that we are going to find, and again, this is another significant part of my life for about 5 years, and it goes back to the class of Gods of the Mountains, where I gave a little bit of information about this, where I spent about 5 years with this fellow who is probably the foremost geomantic scientist on the planet. And he's clairvoyant, and he's probably written about 25 books on this. And I invited him up to Tahoe because I knew this was a sacred place. That's one of the reasons I came here from China to live. After China, I needed something like this to heal and hide. And so I was very aware. I couldn't specifically say this and that about it, but I invited him up for a 5-year period. We went around systematically in terms of the Tahoe Basin, the greater Tahoe area, and identified about 25 out of about 128 different types of geomantic features or sacred sites that are here at Lake Tahoe. Even in considering a New Jerusalem that is right over the top, right over Lake Tahoe. Celestial cities in the bottom of Lake Tahoe. Cosmic dragons that are in the bottom of Lake Tahoe. Masters centers in various parts around here. There's a Grail Castle right over here at Castle Peak. You could get into all kinds of things, and these are real. They're totally real, but they're in the etheric dimension. They're one dimension inner from the physical. And we're going to find that then when we start opening up to really being able to see the Earth in this geomantic way, where we see the very energy and life force of the Earth, then we're going to see that we want to remember that the Earth itself is a being. It's very alive. And that aspect that we would call the soul of the Earth And another way of describing it from a more geometric, esoteric standpoint, it is what we would call the landscape angel of the earth, which is very much involved in the sculpting and designing of the actual earth, and what we know of as nature is known as Gaia, which is an ancient Greek term. It comes from the Greek tradition, but it's true. This is being. This being, we are part of this being, a very important part of it. And so we could say that our evolution and Gaia's evolution are deeply intertwined. We are part of it, it is a part of us. And we're going to find then, to understand ourselves, we also need to understand this being of the earth, Gaia. And so when we get into investigating Gaia, we're going to find that when we start connecting energetically, and kind of what I would use as a comparison, I think most of you are probably familiar with acupuncture. And that knowledge of the human energetic system that regular Western medicine really wouldn't recognize, but that which has to do with meridians and the energy flows and chakras and nadis and all of these things, that if we look clairvoyantly at someone, we can see the whole energy body of the individual with all of these power spots, chakras, etc., meridians, and the flow. You can just see the flow of the light through that. Well, okay, we have got this whole light design that is the energetic foundation of our being. So does the earth. And so when we go to Avebury, which is in the southern part of England, we're going to find that Avebury, for the entire planet, is the navel of the earth. It's the umbilicus. This is where, so when we talk about an umbilicus, I mean, this is the connection with a mother and a child in terms of that child being able to survive and grow until it's born to be on its own. It is really getting its sustenance from the mother. And then when it's born, the umbilical cord is cut. Well, we're not ready to cut the cosmic umbilical cord to the earth. Where the star system that is the direct source of the basis of Earth evolution is Ursa Major. Ursa Major, the Great Bear, the seven rishis, that which is right next to Ursa Minor, which is the little bear, of which in the tail of the little bear is Polaris, the pole star, toward which the entire cosmos revolves around, or what we call the North Star. All the rest of the stars move. There's one star that doesn't move, that all the other stars revolve around, and that is Polaris. So when we look in the northern sky at the two bears, because they're right next to each other, we're going to find Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. But Ursa Major is the one that we're focused on, which means the Great Bear. And we're going to find that the energy from the Great Bear comes into the earth directly at Avebury. And think of it as an umbilical cord from an energetic standpoint. One of the connections here is King Arthur, because King Arthur is an incarnation, an avatar from Ursa Major. Yeah. So what does Arthur mean? It means bear. And so when we talk about this region, and talk about creating heaven on earth, this is a whole nother thing. But Camelot was that divine design that he was here to implement to create heaven on earth after the fall of the Roman Empire and that of Europe going into chaos. And we are going to find that King Arthur came in, and much of this was obviously screwed up, but still it has a lot to do with this area. And he came in from Ursa Major into this area of England to really fulfill his destiny and to do what he was here to do. So here we want to understand that we have this direct connection with Ursa Major, and that so much of what goes on here has a direct connection in all kinds of ways to Ursa Major. Another way of understanding this, and interestingly it's another significant part of my background, but we're going to find that Ursa Major is also known as the seven rishis in the Vedic tradition. Rishi means seer. It goes directly back to ancient Vedic India, which became the repository of all of the ancient knowledge of Lemuria and Atlantis, etc., that now is the basis of all knowledge in post-Atlantean times. And the 7 rishis relate to, it can relate to everything from the 7 chakras and the 7 cosmic dimensions. And it basically brings in all knowledge, all wisdom, and the entire cosmic mind that is directly connected into Earth. And it comes into the Earth at Avebury. Now we're also going to find that there are there's many important stars, but there's 2 other significantly important stars directly connected to the Earth. And one is Sirius, part of the dog star. That is the brightest star from the Earth. And we're going to find that it is the father or solar principle, and that there is a golden tube of light that goes from Sirius also into Avebury. And we're also going to find that the second strongest star or brightest star from the Earth is Canopus, which is an Argo Novis. And that is the mother energy, and it's a silver cord that comes in from Canopus into Avebury. So when we look at this in a geomantic sense, we're seeing this incredible energy coming in from Ursa Major. We're seeing this golden solar energy, father energy, coming in from Sirius. We're seeing this silver mother energy coming in from Canopus. And then we're going to find, because it's the umbilicus, that from this standpoint, then there is this, what happens when this energy comes into the Earth is that it goes around the whole Earth in a circular fashion. And the direction in which it does it, if you want to kind of know the direction from Avebury, what technically is Mount Meru in the South Pacific, it goes, so this line goes from Avebury through around the Earth, coming back to Avebury, but with the direction of going down through the South Pacific and around. Now, I don't know, and again, it's symbolism. There's all, when we get into this stuff, symbolism is really cool. I mean, it's opens up a whole other world. But how many of you are familiar with that ancient picture or symbol of the snake with a tail in its mouth? It's called the Ouroboros. So that is what you want to visualize as this energy line going from Avebury through the South Pacific and back again as the Ouroboros. When we talk about the serpent, we talk about these energies. I'm not going to go off into this tonight because there isn't time. But when we start talking about these cosmic forces and energies, they've been represented in symbolic form in many different ways. And if we wanted to relate to it in another way, for those of you who are familiar with this terminology, the Kundalini, when we start talking about this serpent energy, Kundalini means the serpent power, the serpent fire. We're talking about similar cosmic energies and electromagnetic energy that has to do with growth and evolution and transformation and metamorphosis that forms the basis of all of life. And it's on all different levels. So now we're talking on a planetary level and on a galactic level. So here, then also, this, so that which comes in to Avebury then gets distributed through the whole planet. And so we're going to find that there's a whole matrix, ley lines we can get into. I'm not going to get into all the details now. Some of you have probably heard of this. But it's a grid. It's an energetic grid that basically is laid out through the whole planet that really is the life force. And this is all on the etheric level. And dowsers can identify it. And to give you an idea about these energetic lines or bands that all kinds of people have discovered, from dowsers and people who are psychic and clairvoyant and various things. And these energetic lines will be of a dimension from about 300 yards to a quarter mile wide. And it will just depend. And there will be the actual conditions on the planet that will either expand or contract that energy flow depending upon the conditions. And one of the things that scientists, now this is coming from a science's standpoint, scientists think as to why the megalithic structures in the south of England and also the crop circles in the south of England, that there's a unique structure to the land in that it is a chalk clay and water aquifers are very abundant under the ground. This creates very interesting energetic phenomena. And here, especially when we're talking about a lot of this cosmic energy coming in. So now on top of this, I want to add some more, because there's, and this was some of what I was talking about in the Gods of the Mountains class. But there are 1,746 domes on the planet.
The exploitation of
And
land,
these domes,
Earth
so
is
a
coming
dome
back to roost.
is an etheric
Pluto
structure
transit in Capricorn.
that is 33
Karma is
miles
karma.
in
Just like
diameter
us talking about,
and
okay,
16 and a
you have an
half
individual reading,
feet
you know,
high, 16 and a half miles
this is
high.
karma, it's activated. What I can guarantee
And
you is that your
it is
karma
directly
will
connected to a
time.
star
That's astrology.
of our galaxy.
And part of it is
So
that
there
we
are
have the free will choice in terms of how we choose
1,746
to deal with
domes,
it.
which means
So there's the next
1,746 stars.
Freedom.
And their
Which other
influences, or what we
beings
would
don't
call
have.
their star
And that's,
angels,
for example, in a
are
simple
directly
way,
connected
saying the
into
election
the
back on
earth.
November 3rd, there
To
was a
give you an
choice
idea,
between
right
the
here
American
where we
people,
live
President
in
McKinley,
Tahoe,
or
there are 3
Obama.
domes right here.
In
There's
terms
one
of
on Castle
policies
Peak,
and
there's one on
personal
Mount
dealings with
Talac, and
the
there's one on Mount
Well, the
Rose.
American people made a choice.
And we're going to find that this is bringing in this
potential
galactic cosmic energy.
It's an
And that there
ongoing
are
thing.
48
Understand
minor
overall
domes
17
that
years is
spread
a
out
fraction.
from each
Okay.
dome. So when we start, and they go out in a
Said for the past
Fibonacci
number of years,
spiral.
Bush is the Hooper,
And
Hoover
so
is
they
the
spread
21st
out
century, and whoever
within the
next president
territory.
is
So there's
gonna be, they
overlapping
will
energies.
have no
Because
choice.
if we start
I don't
talking
care if
about
the
Mount
king
Talac and
was elected.
Castle Peak
Circumstances
and
will
Mount
permit
Rose
when
in terms
private
of
sector falls
33
apart,
miles and these
what's
kinds of
left?
things, and plus the
The only thing left
domes.
is the
And the
government.
domes are increased
There's nothing left.
differentiation of the energy and
That's what
consciousness of the specific
private sector
star
is
of
completely
which
falling
that is a
apart.
dome.
There's
And these
no
domes
left. And
are spread all over the
Obama
earth.
said, it's
But
the
to give you an
lesser of two
idea,
evils. It's better to do something than
When
nothing.
we start
But if
talking
you do
about
nothing,
Wiltshire,
this thing would be
which is
so
this
bad,
small
so quick,
county in the south of
it would
England,
blow you away. I mean,
there are
you think of that,
33 domes.
if Stepson
We
was
talk
Hoover,
about Somerset, right next
this
to
we
it,
would
King
just
Arthur
be
land,
the most we would be in
22
shock.
domes.
The whole-
We have
I mean,
55 domes
but the whole
in an area
situation would
that
be
is
so
smaller
much
than
more
the size of
delicate.
Delaware.
Steps are
And one of
being
the
taken,
things
and
that
they are
usually
beginning to get
happens
traction, and they are
is
beginning
in
to address
ancient past,
some of
because
the
these
underlying
domes were
issues,
here from the
but
beginning.
it's still going to take
And
time.
when
But
the
that's
earth
the
was still
optimism.
very malleable,
That's also even
the
astrological.
domes actually pulled
So
the
it's
earth
these
up
policies
into
being
mountains.
instituted that are beginning to
And so
address
you're
it.
usually going to find a dome is
Optimism.
directly, there's a
It
mountain
doesn't deny
inside of a
the
dome.
overall
When we go to Wiltshire and
It has
Somerset,
to do with the
you're not going to
development
find any
of the
mountains.
system and the destruction of the
Mountains?
power structure.
Yeah,
Basically,
and some of them
the
man-made like Silbury
Our
Hill.
power and
And
movement
so
got
we're
concentrated
going to
in
find that
very small
this
1%.
area is the most richly, densely
99%.
populated
God did not create us to live in
dome
all
area of the entire
God
planet.
created us to live in all abundance,
And
the very nature
it's
of
bringing in
abundance.
all this
When you
cosmic
have a
energy,
system
all this
that
star
basically
energy in here.
rewards in an
And
unequal
why
way,
do we think
where
that's
the
happening?
distribution of
Well, because
wealth
it's the
is
navel of the
really,
earth. It's the navel.
slanted in
And
ways
one of the
that
things to
favor
understand
some
about
and don't favor
Avebury
others.
and the navel
We
of
have
the
serious
earth
problems.
is from here,
That is what
this
the
energy
situation
gets
comes from
distributed through
in
the
terms of
entire
darkness
geomatic
or
earth
the
system.
evolution of consciousness.
So the things that are
The system
there
no longer
are,
fits the evolution of consciousness
are
of
something that's
humanity,
distributed through
and
the
it
entire
is
planet.
dying.
And
what
so,
takes
this, and from a
place,
very
Pluto goes
primary
into
standpoint,
Aquarius
because it's like the center energetically of the
2024.
planet in that
Aquarius
regard.
is that sign of the zodiac
So
that rules the
when
world from
we
evolution.
then look at
It
this
is what
from
lives enlightenment,
from
cosmic
why
consciousness, and
the crop
self-realization.
circles,
It
the
is what
vast
lives
majority of the
community
crop circles
and
are
brotherly,
here.
sisterly love,
We're going to
the
find that
ideal
the influence
society
of the
heaven
crop
on earth.
circles being
It
in
is
this
what
area
relates to the full
is then
unfoldment of the
distributed
mind
through
and
the
the
whole
full
planet.
unfoldment of the heart. We're talking, and Pluto on another level.
And so
understand
here
is
with this
the
concentration and in a
those
very
people who are
even and
familiar
balanced
with
way.
that
And
term,
the other
I'm
thing
not
to
gonna
understand
get
is
into it
when we
now,
get into the
but it's
continent,
the
when we get into various other
concentrated,
places, because
powerful
there's
evolutionary
hundreds,
force
literally
of God.
hundreds of
It
megalithic
is behind
monuments
all growth
in
and
Great Britain.
evolution and
They're everywhere.
transformation in
And I haven't
many
gotten
ways.
into Barrows
So
and
another
all
way
these
of
other
understanding
types
Pluto
of
is this
features
cosmic
that are very,
force.
very
It's actually
cosmic
cosmic
from the
force.
standpoint of what the
When
ancients
it's
were doing.
individualized
Because
within the human
basically,
being, it's known as
when we
community.
look at this and we look at Avebury, we look at Stonehenge, we look at all these,
The force
and
within the base of the
even
spine,
though there were
it rises
still,
up evolutionarily to open the
I have to
chakras, which
laugh
consciousness
because
centers
it was
within
just
the
at
spine.
Stonehenge again, and I
Related
got
directly
this
to the
book on
process of
Stonehenge,
expansion
and
of consciousness
I've had a bunch and I've gone there
is
quite a few
keeping it
times, and
open.
even back in
So
1962,
when we
I
talk
remember
about
this when I was reading
understand
in high
Pluto is
school.
the
A
force
book
of
came out
evolution.
by Gerald
When it comes
Hawkins
into
called
Capricorn, that
Stonehenge
force of
Decoded.
evolution is saying
And it was the
the
first
validity of the power
thing that came out.
structures
It was a
of society,
scientist from
business, and
Stanford.
politics.
They had gone over there, and he really
You
thought that there
cannot
was a
contain
basis
this energy
to
within
the
the
alignment of
flow
Stonehenge
apart.
with the stars,
It's like
which this
basically
had never
turn
really
the
been
strictest
considered
form
seriously before.
consciousness that
And
needs to
so
express
he went over
things
there
to
for several
express
years, and he
things
did all the
result in
measurements, and he did alignments and all of this
compensate
stuff,
having spiritual crisis.
and he wrote this
It's like
book and
having a
explaining
health
how
crisis.
Stonehenge was this incredible celestial observatory of the sun and of the moon, and actually further research has proven that was basic. It actually has to do with the rising of particular specific star systems that have, just like we're talking about these domes and the influences, these ancients were aware of these influences from even these precise specific star systems that were directly connected in with our Earth evolution and the whole destiny. And they wanted to be aligned with them. They wanted to know when their influence was at their maximum, because there's the rising and the setting of the stars during the seasons. And you would find all of these megalithic monuments are just incredible. And some of them are massive from the standpoint of really being able to align with almost any star and all of the sun cycles and all of the moon cycles. But then there are some that are just specifically for functions in terms of in terms of a specific star system or several specific star systems that that particular group was most focused on. And so with this, and one of the things, so it became kind of accepted that, and another fellow, I forget his name for the moment, but in the 80s, and he was an engineer, scientist, astronomer, that went Thom, T-H-O-M, British guy, went around and spent 10, 12 years going all over Great Britain, and all of these sites, he did the engineering for them, and he basically was able to prove all of these alignments. Anyway, so picking up, it isn't the official guide, but it's one that's promoted at Stonehenge that they have out right now. And even to this day, the official line is they poo-poo all of this. Even though there's been all this scientific research, they're so threatened, they can't accept that these ancient people were more knowledgeable or had skills and knowledge and engineering ability and astronomical ability to be able to create these things. They just can't handle the idea that these people might be more knowledgeable than themselves. And there's more to it than that, but that's one part of it. And so, but the bigger part, the deeper part to understand is looking at this from a whole other way. Because, so when we start talking about these megalithic stone circles, let's go back to the comparison with acupuncture. So if we think there's blockages in the system, or we want to enhance flow within a particular meridian or whatever, what do? We put needles. The stones are needles. The stones are needles, and it has to do with grounding. This has to do with grounding these celestial energies into the earth in a way that it just helps to facilitate heaven on earth. Helps to facilitate.
So if we've got the new grid now, but the ley lines are the same, and so where those stones are,
there isn't new. What do you mean the new grid?
Or fight it and kick and scream
and basically deny
what is going on.
Yeah, that's always been.
Attack
so
to the lower
are
material
those,
itself is
is
very
that shifting?
animalistic,
No.
greedy,
No.
fearful.
No, the grid isn't shifting, it's being enhanced. It's being empowered. When we talk about grounding, so what's happening is that vibration is shifting. Everything is getting more intense. Everything is speeding up. We can all feel it. It's very, very intense. And basically, the power is amping up. The energy is amping up. The consciousness is amping up. And so basically, to facilitate that, there need to be things that are done to clean out the system, to up the system. And part of that is the crop circles.
So the crop circles are the new codes coming through, and because it comes in there and it goes throughout the earth, that's circulating the new language.
Right.
It's actually, it's new to us because we
Yeah,
got it.
it's ancient, but basically it's waking us up.
So
It's awakening the earth and it's awakening mankind. Moving into the age of light.
That's why not to worry.
And it's a language of light. It's not to worry. I mean, it's going to be messy the next couple of years, but where we're going is really cool. But that has to do with the resistance of the darkness to the light, and that's an inevitable thing. That's part of what's going on.
Is
the
anybody
master
who's-
chose that
who's
time which
able
they were ready
to read the
for
language
initiation.
of
And at
these
that
crop
time, and I'll
circles?
just use the example.
Is there
of the
anyone?
Great
Yeah.
Pyramid,
Yeah.
because
Have
every
they,
society
Well, yeah, I
has
mean,
its own
that's
Asiatic manner,
part of it. So,
manner, but
I
the
mean,
Great
that's
Pyramid
getting into
is
this whole thing. But the
the
answer is
kingdom.
yes, because it is a
And
universal
the
language.
Egyptian priesthood,
And it
this
is
was
something that's
placed in the
continuing to
stone
be
sarcophagus
investigated
of
and
the Great Pyramid,
and understood, and that's part of the study. So let me share something with you. So
they actually
a number of
obviously
things. We
adapt
don't want to go too late, but anyway.
the third body connected to
So
the
think of it this
field,
way. So we've had over years, we've had
where the
this
light
progression of
force
crop
in a very,
circles that's been
very
going on
limited
25 plus
sublimated
years.
way, still
And so
connected with
crop
the physical
circles are
body, but if
laid
not,
out, if you want to use that
test cell,
terminology,
you would say you
within
would
a
play
particular
with
summer.
that. But
And then
they
the farmer
would
comes along and
light
harvests
or
his
light
crop.
body or etheric body
And
still
interestingly, it
connected
doesn't
with the
damage the
field,
crop,
but
so
it
you know that's
disengaged
pretty
from the
cool.
rest of the body
And
appears
and
as
so
a corpse.
and so
During this 3-day period,
you think,
the
okay, the
soul
crop
and
circle's
spirit of
gone,
the individual
and
ascended
so
into the
you know
spiritual
next season
world
come
to
around,
basically
you know,
experience
new
all these 50 laws
crop of
creation
whatever it
that
is, new crop
typically
circles, etc.
reference to.
But the
All
reality is the
activities
crop
of
circles aren't
hierarchies of
gone.
spiritual life waves of beings of each one of these levels
So,
of creation. And
they stay in the
consciously
etheric.
with them learn the divine plan, actually
Once the
had
farmer harvests the
contact,
crop,
brought all that knowledge
from a
back
physical, visible
in
standpoint in terms of the
their
eyes, it's gone.
bodies at the end of 3 days.
But if we look clairvoyantly at this spot, we're going to see, no, those symbols, those crop circles are still there. And what is happening is they're layering this knowledge, and it's building this knowledge, and it's getting to be this complex story. It's like, first of all, we got letters, which are the numbers, which we talk about 1 and 2, and these geometric forms. And letters then form. We have been stumbling around in ignorance for a long time, but there is the natural process of evolution, of consciousness. This initiation is connected directly to an inner initiation that is available to each and every one of us now. It has been since 1932. It's going to last for the next 300 years. And it is that, and forget about theology, forget about what, you know, the Christian terminology that I'm about to use, forget about that, because I'm not using it in those terms. We're talking esoteric, spiritual knowledge here of truth that is very profound, that has to do with the evolution of the universe and the evolution of humanity. And what is going on right now is the second coming of the Christ. And what is behind this whole falling apart of the system or world as we know it is the second coming of the Christ. Now let's be clear, the Christ being is the creator being of our universe. Jesus was a human being. Jesus and the Christ became one at the time of the baptism in the Jordan for 3 years until the crucifixion on the cross. Jesus is an ascended master. He's a human being that's gone through human evolution and is now at that next stage and works with the other ascended masters in terms of guiding humanity in their evolutionary process. The Christ being is the creator being of our universe. It's the cosmic being. It's not of this earth. It's not of human evolution. It's of the entire cosmos. When it's known as the Son, S-O-N, of God, in truth, if we correctly understand that terminology, it's absolutely true, because the Son is that which creates the intention of the Father. We're going to see that this works with Sophia, which is what this is very much about. This is not an outer event, the second coming of the Christ. All of these particular religions that are saying, oh yeah, the second coming of the Christ, and all that's an outer, no. That will not be. There's going to be somebody there, but it isn't going to be the Christ. This is an inner event that is available to every single human being through the heart. There are actually 5 ventricles to the heart. Science would say there's 4. There's 5. The 5th ventricle is an etheric ventricle. It is in the etheric dimension. It's in that dimension that is one dimension inner from the physical. So when I'm saying this is an etheric event, the cosmic Christ is basically present in the etheric dimension, available. Back 2,000 years ago, the Christ incarnated in Palestine, a backwater country of the Roman Empire, for 3 years and was exposed to a very small handful of people for very definite reasons that at some point we can get into. But let's be clear, the second coming of the Christ is of a whole completely different nature. It is a cosmic event that's is available to every human being. And We mean a conscious, personal relationship with the Creator being who's cosmic, and I'm not limiting it, but it's to give you a sense. The cosmic nature of this being is cosmic love. Cosmic love. We're not talking about a feeling and emotion. We're not talking about some sentimentality. We're talking about a cosmic force and power that's the glue of the universe, that actually is the very basis of life itself. And it is that we are beings of love, wisdom. As a spiritual life wave of beings, we are to make this planet a planet of love, wisdom. That agency of the cosmos is the Christ that injected love of equality into human evolution 2,000 years ago, when we were at a very different stage evolutionarily. But now we are at that stage where we are individually able to embrace this consciousness and become enlightened. Because the true higher spiritual self of everything in creation is the Christ being. So your higher self, even though we're talking about individuality here, but your higher self and my higher self is one. And we're going to find the nature of that higher self is love. It's not greed. It's not fear. It's not all of these other lower emotions. We've come to the point where we are morphing the caterpillar into the butterfly. Pluto rules metamorphosis and quantum shifts. We're morphing from the caterpillar to the butterfly with Pluto's transit through Capricorn over these next 17 years. We have to understand our relationship with the world. Well, first of all, before I move to that, this connecting with the Christ consciousness has to do with meditation and spiritual practice and allowing one's attention and awareness to go within, to the soul and the spirit. There's many techniques, that's for future classes if you don't already have some. But this is a living, conscious experience. In a basic, simple way, every day to the degree, if you do several times a day, put your attention on the heart and actually feel the heart. And I mean feel the heart. And I don't mean just the physical heart. Because when we start talking about the soul and the spirit, we're talking about dimensions that, well, what did I say? Basically, the physical dimension is the 50th layer, and there's 49 more. So when we start going within, because the physical is the outer crust, like the rind of an orange, of creation, and we start going within, whoa, hold on to your hat. I mean, there's a lot. And so when we start going within, and we start on the level of feeling, begin to consciously experience our heart, this is step one. We need to shift our awareness from our head to our heart. It has to be heart-based thinking that we are shifting into, because the lower material self's use of the mind is very calculative, and it's very practical, and it's very mechanical, and it's very materialistic. It has to do with survival. But when we shift the mind into the heart, or love and wisdom, we're going to find that our whole thinking changes. It shifts, and it becomes wise, and it becomes loving. And we're in the process of that opening, the crustiness, if you will, the hard-heartedness of the capitalist system. I'm just saying that as an example because we could apply it to all kinds of things. I mean, what is the biggest killer of human life? Heart disease. What is this? Hard-heartedness. What is this? This is a hardening of the heart. Why? Because of how we treat each other. And what really is going to shift that is really activating what the true nature of the heart is, which is love. And I'm not speaking emotional stuff. No, I'm speaking cosmic, universal. We are all one. And I don't mean some trite kind of abstraction. I mean, I literally experience you as myself. And that is in a state of bliss. When we start talking about love and the force and the power of cosmic love, it's bliss. The true nature of life is bliss or intense happiness. And it has to do with opening up our hearts. So that's step one. Then step two is re-engaging the world, and we'll define the world exactly, with an open heart. When we speak of the world, the ancient term for the world is Sophia. Sophia is that goddess of the ancient traditions. It was part of the original Christian church. It was a fundamental part of Gnosticism, which got killed out as heresy. It still is today part of the Russian and Greek Orthodox churches. Sophia is greatly honored, revered, and a significant part of the rituals. But in the Western Roman Church, it was wiped out. Templars reinstated it in the cathedrals. This gets into all kinds of other things. But when we speak of the world, we specifically mean the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, nature, the stars, the planets, or the whole cosmic environment in which our being is. When we say the world, we don't mean just this earth. We mean the whole cosmic cosmos. That is the world. And the being of the world in this sense is Sophia. And it's a divine feminine expression. And Sophia in Greek means wisdom, meaning that all the cosmic wisdom is structured into creation. It's structured into nature. It's structured into your body. It's structured into all that has been created divinely as part of the divine plan. So as we were talking about Goethe in the beginning, as an alternative view of science or investigation of nature, true Sophionic wisdom is the correct result of true scientific investigation, and it's not what we have in terms of scientific materialism. It's about entering into a relationship with nature in terms of the sacredness of nature and the honoring of nature to knowing and understanding its soul and its spirit, and that it does embody that whole aspect of wisdom that is the basis of all life, because you can't create a divine plan without wisdom. The wisdom of the divine mind is omnipresent and structured within the entire creation, within every rock and every tree and every cloud and every speck of water, and within every star and every planet. And in the ancient traditions, the world was known as Sophia. The Latin term is anima mundi, the soul of the world. And it is a living, experiential being. I'm not speaking of an abstraction. The actual encounter on a personal, conscious level of the individual with Sophia is as real as it connecting with the Christ. The Christ is inner as love. Sophia is outer as wisdom. And it is us opening up our heart in love and embracing the world, and that includes our fellow man. We actually then integrate wisdom into that love, and we bring together in our hearts, because the actual practical process is there's many ways, but in a basic way, in your daily life, whether it's a bird that's singing, take that image and feeling and put it in your heart and experience it in your heart. And you're going to experience it in a completely different way than you do through just experiencing it through your outer senses. Take an individual that you encounter and put that person in your heart and experience that person in your heart. You're going to experience that person in a completely different way than you would just in our usual way. We're talking about a major shifting of consciousness. This is the initiation that we are talking about, and it requires us re-engaging the world in a correct manner, in right consciousness, to recreate the world that is the basis of Pluto and Aquarius in 2024. In 2024, it's a death process of the existing society as we know it, and it's a birth of the soul and spirit and love wisdom in a way that's never been experienced. And we're talking at a level of mass consciousness, not in an individual way, as we spoke of in the ancient times. Since the Christ event, the Christ being actually went through every stage of initiation publicly in its lifetime to actually show the stages of initiation that we have to go through. And from that point on, initiation was no longer correctly done within the precincts of the temple through the priesthood choosing particular individualities. Initiation was open to every human soul in the context of your daily life. Your daily life is your initiation. And so here, when we are going through this time of crisis, understand that this crisis is not just this outer event of the failure of the financial system. We are talking about stuff here that's gigantic, because when we understand the true role of humanity in terms of this whole cosmos, we are the keystone for the entire universe, and the battle over the human soul that's taking place here on Earth is the implications for this are gigantic in terms of the whole cosmos, because we are such a special evolution, which we really can't get into at this time. So when we talk about this time of initiation, it's very important that we understand what's going on. And we understand that crisis is opportunity. And we understand that it is death and rebirth process and a purification and a cleansing that wants to take place at both an individual and a collective level. The opportunities here are huge. We can fight it and be in denial of it and go into fear, and fear shuts us down, pulls us away, hardens the heart, hardens the soul, and we become part of the problem and not part of the solution. And each one of us has the opportunity to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And that, I can tell you, just in terms of quality of life, you want to be part of the solution. Because the world, not that you don't care, because we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. We greatly care. The system that will be created will be based on community. The system that will be created will be grassroots as opposed to hierarchical. It will be local as opposed to international. It will be based on cooperation as opposed to competition. It is about embracing each other at a grassroots level and recreating community that really is human and soulful, that's based in love and wisdom, and that really isn't based on, let me screw you before you screw me. Because that's basically what capitalism is. It will be a capitalism. It's about investing locally as opposed to investing in the New York stock market. That, not time to get into. That's all kinds of problems with that. Money is power. Keep it local. Don't give it to somebody that you don't know anything about, who's going to use it for things you know nothing about. Money is for I walked away from the investment industry after so many years with many little pithy bits of wisdom that I learned over the time, and one of the primary ones is the best investment any of you can make is investing in yourself.
Are you calling that trickle-up economics?
Could be. Yeah, that would be good. So when we talk about, to give you an idea, over almost 100 years ago, the Ascended Masters, through Alice Bailey, identified 2024 as the year that their plan was to enter physically back into human society and civilization in order to reestablish their teaching and healing centers. That is the time Pluto goes into Aquarius. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. We've got to clean up a lot of messes and shift a lot of stuff in order to really be worthy and ready for the Ascended Masters to actually come physically back out into human society and really be the basis of the new society that is going to be evolving. But that new society is already sprouting up amongst all of this falling apart of what is going on. The seeds are already there. People are already doing these things. Know that that is the trend of time. Know that that's where you want to invest if you want to invest your money. Capital will be needed. It will still be capitalism, but it's going to be a whole human, soulful capitalism that really has to do with the greater good of mankind, not through selfish self-interest. So one last thought, because we've gone over, but when we talk about this, there is a term that really is the attitude that you want to have, that each one of us wants and needs to have as we move into the future, because the future is unknown, and you want to understand, without talking about the dynamics, that the higher spiritual self unfolds through that stream of time from the future. The lower material self is that which is the stream of time of the past. We as souls and spiritual beings are at the cross currents of past and future. Memory rules the consciousness of the past and the lower self. Intuition rules the consciousness of the higher spiritual self in the future. We are talking about a whole different consciousness, and I'm speaking just very briefly. This is where we are at these cross currents and the forces that are taking place. Knowing that all of us, to a certain degree, if we're honest, fear the future. We have a certain fear of the unknown, a certain fear of uncertainty. That is the time that we are in. But that is actually what helps us to grow. It is about the soul strengthens, the spirit strengthens. In terms of, the soul does not strengthen by leading a comfortable life, an easy life.
Life was not designed for us to drink pina coladas on the beach. That's not how we grow and evolve. It is through challenge and unfolding, it's through challenge that we unfold consciousness. That is how we actualize consciousness. It's through challenge. And so understand, we are faced with the greatest challenges, therefore the greatest opportunities. But also, there's no question, it's part of our experience in the physical dimension, there is fear. And fear, we must have courage to overcome fear. Mars is the planet of courage. And we will find it is the warrior in you. And it's the ability to overcome fear, to do what needs to be done, to not become paralyzed, to not become a deer in the headlight, to not freeze up. Because what's happened to the system? It's frozen up. The chance of you freezing up is right there too. Do not succumb to freezing up. We've got to keep moving ahead. And once we have a map and we know our direction and what we're supposed to be moving towards, then we can do that. And that's what we're going to be doing in these classes. Okay. The attitude that needs to be unfolded is that which is known as amor fati. It is Latin, and amor fati means love of destiny. And it's an attitude that really is rather bold. It's more of a youthful attitude when we were young, when we really had nothing to lose as much. We had a certain boldness in terms of experiencing life and stepping forward into new experience and a certain sense of adventure, a certain sense of excitement. That is exactly what we are talking about in terms of amor fati, or love of destiny. We have to establish our consciousness in this state where we regain and rekindle this sense of adventure, this sense of, wow, even though I don't know what's coming down, potentially something good is happening here, and it's rather cool, even though I may have to sacrifice a few of my favorite pet things in the process of getting from here to there, but in the bigger picture, this is extremely cool, and wow, I wouldn't want to miss this adventure for the world, and life is an adventure. We've gotten stuck in this whole thing of trying to get safe and secure, which isn't going to work, because the nature of life is not about safety and security, it's an adventure. And so we have to get into this attitude of amor fati, and if we wanted to look at a classic traditional symbolism of this state of being, it is the Fool in the tarot deck. The Fool is 0, Aleph, the beginning, and it symbolizes the higher spiritual self. The other 21 cards have to do with the different stages of initiation. The last one is the world. What did we just talk about? Sophia. How do we gain the world? It is through the adventure of life and going through the initiatic process of basically unfolding consciousness through various tests and trials and experiences in order to basically achieve cosmic consciousness, which is the living consciousness of the entire cosmos within your individuality. Many, many, many themes associated with this. This is just to give you an overview, and unfortunately we've gone over time, and so I want to thank you very much for coming. Good night.
Welcome to Ash.